Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect of the MMA Fight Archive. It's been a while since you guys have heard me plug that, but we are slowly approaching 6,000 fighter profiles. I'll be dropping another video to promote that service for you guys. We have over 120 subscribers on the service as well. So if you enjoy doing your own research and studying these fights, breaking down these fights, make sure you guys check out the MMA Fight Archive because it is used by some of the top commentators in the world, some of the top coaches and fighters to help them break down their opponents or any fighters or fights that they are breaking down. Again, as many direct links as possible to pretty much 6,000 fighters of their past fights. We have it all on the MMA Fight Archive. 7-day free trial. Check the link in the description below. Give it a whirl. Let me know what you think. And I'm sure if you do your own studying, you'll be more than happy with what the service has to offer. All right. This week, we're talking about UFC Vancouver, which is headlined by a middleweight middleweight title fight. It could be a middleweight title eliminator, as we have Reinier de Ridder, who is absolutely streaking right now, going up against Brendan Allen, who's stepping in on somewhat short notice for the injured Anthony Fluffy Hernandez. That original main event was absolute fire, but I feel like some of the sizzle has worn off after Brendan Allen has stepped in, a guy that's 1-2 in his last 3 fights, but at least de Ridder still gets to stay active and cement himself amongst the top middleweights on the UFC roster. There are 7 Canadians representing the home soil here out of the 13 fights. Most notably in the co-main event, we got Mike Malott taking on veteran Kevin Holland, and then Jasudavicius battling most recent flyweight title challenger Manon Fiorot. All right. Let's do a quick Actually, I just want to say, I appreciate you guys bearing with me in terms of the tardiness of dropping this breakdown for you guys. Obviously, a lot of things going on this week to push this thing back, but finally got it done for you guys here and dropping it. It would have been done a few hours earlier had it not been for the Jays game, though. Hence the Jays. I told you guys, I'm rocking the Jays hat for every single video for as long as they're in the playoffs, or hopefully once they win the World Series as well. So big game for them here on Wednesday, picking up that road victory to get the series now to 2-1. Got to get another solid 2 out of them here, or even 1 to try to get this series back in Toronto for Game 6 and Game 7. Rooting for the Jays, but we needed that big win there. All right. Recap for the last UFC event that we had in terms of the Lock of the Night and Dog of the Night play. Lock of the Night kind of fumbles once again with Clayton Carpenter coming up short against Jafel Filho. I really believed in Carpenter's submission defense and thought that he could stay out of too much trouble from Filho here, but Filho ends up getting that nasty Kimura and forces the tap from Carpenter, who still seems like he needs a little bit more seasoning before he can face some of the more tougher competition that the flyweight division has to offer. We did hit our Lock of the Night play for the LFA and Ronald Humphrey, but it was a little bit chalky there, so that brings our Lock of the Night record for 2025 to 51-33 now for a 61% hit rate. Just got to keep clawing away at it. Dog of the Night looked really good, and this Dog of the Night probably should have been the Lock of the Night for us on the UFC card this past weekend, as Mario Pinto went out there and absolutely obliterated Jonata Diaz, and I was very surprised that he was the underdog. A lot of people expected Pinto to go out there and just strike with Diaz, and I think a lot of people are reading into Austin Lane dropping Pinto in the opening round of that matchup and saying, hey, if Lane can do that to Pinto, obviously Diaz is going to be able to, but they fail to realize that this is mixed martial arts. Not only is it mixed martial arts, but the head coach for Mario Pinto is Stuart Austin, who's known for his grappling and his jiu-jitsu. So it was just a matter of time before Pinto showed us that side of his game, and he did it successfully against Diaz, dominating him on the mat and eventually getting that second round stoppage. We did lose our LFA Dog of the Night play, which I can't remember off the top of my head here, but that now brings our Dog of the Night record to 49-55 for a 47% hit rate, firmly entrenched in profit for that Dog of the Night record. So happy about that. Would be nice to get 50% hit rate. But again, we still got about 2.5 months left to break down fights and try to crack that mark. But again, we're in the profit, so I'm happy about that. All right. Reminder, there are three other events going down Saturday morning. I won't have video breakdowns for them, but I will be breaking down PFL Africa, KSW 111, and OKTAGON 78, all on the Lock of the Night Patreon page, strictly in written form. I will have track plays, probably Lock of the Night and Dog of the Night plays for those as well. If you want access to that, check out the MMALOTN Patreon page. Link for that is in the description below, and I should have that over the next 2 days, breaking those fights down for you guys and getting some track plays out. So make sure you guys check that bad boy out. All right, we got 13 fights to break down for this UFC Vancouver card, so let's get right into it. First matchup up, bantamweight scrap here between Melissa Croden, coming in at -120 for her UFC debut, going up against Tainara Lisboa, who comes in at +100. Starting off on the Croden side of things, it really seemed like her dreams of making it to the top spot in the sport crumbled after she lost her LFA title fight against Jacqueline Cavalcanti, who I believe was signed promptly to the UFC right after that victory. Croden was unable to get to her striking game, where she uses a bit of a karate stance, darts in and out of the pocket, lets go with her shots, and gets back out into distance. But it seemed the traditional striking style of Cavalcanti caused Croden a lot of problems, and she was unable to get off on her game that night. She did manage to come back and pick up 2 dominant victories, largely utilizing her physicality. She took Katharina Laner down repeatedly and eventually finished her in the 3rd round. And then in her last fight against Ashley Dean, a huge physicality advantage there. And we saw her bully Dean up against the cage, landing some nasty Muay Thai knees, elbows, strikes. And then eventually in that 2nd round, it was clear that Dean was broken, and Croden just smothered her right away and got her out of there 22 seconds into that round. Croden is a very strong and dangerous fighter who has switched between training down there at Texas at War MMA, I believe it is, alongside Haley Cowan, another UFC fighter, and also her hometown, I believe it is, up here in Calgary, Alberta, where she's been training with some solid training partners there, most notably Jesse Arnett, who's been a long-time high-ranking Canadian MMA fighter that never really made it to the biggest stage in the world, but he was a little bit too far along in his career and his age to really make it to that level, but that's a very solid training partner for Croden to get some good wrestling chops off of, as he's a very good wrestler as well. And we're starting to see that aspect in Croden's game where she's taking opponents down and utilizing that strength and just brutalizing them. She's finished all 6 of her opponents as well, which is usually unheard of in women's MMA. Now she goes up against Tainara Lisboa, who's looking to bounce back after a submission loss to Luana Santos last time around. And that night she had no answer for the grappling of Santos, who repeatedly took her to the ground and eventually found that last-second Americana victory in the ending of the 2nd round. Lisboa, 2-time national Muay Thai champion down there in Brazil, but we haven't really gotten to see it over her last 2 fights. That win against Ravina Oliveira, she largely leaned on her grappling and smothered Oliveira through the first 2 rounds before getting smothered herself in the 3rd. And then again, that Santos fight, not a lot of it playing out in the striking realm, as Santos knew there was a big hole in Lisboa's game with that grappling, and that's what Santos took full advantage of. I think this is a great matchup for Croden to really put a statement on in her UFC debut. I think she's going to be the stronger and bigger, which is obvious considering the 2-inch height and 2-inch reach advantage. But when it comes down to the strength, I think Lisboa is not going to have any answers for the grappling of Croden, who's clearly been focusing on that aspect of her game, whether it's, putting on the size that she has with some of the strength and conditioning work she's doing, or the fact that she recently earned her BJJ brown belt really makes you believe that she's going to go out there and utilize that physicality, and this is the type of matchup she can do it pretty effectively. Mixed in the fact that we're getting a pretty good number on her plus money inside the distance line. I love her money line here, and I think she gets the job done on the ground and adds another finish to her MMA record. Next up, we got Azamat Bekoev coming in at -280, going up against Yusri Belgaroui, who comes in at +240. Now, Bekoev made short work of Ryan Loder last time around, and that was a fight where I really thought we were getting some good plus money on Loder, who had a good enough wrestling game to really take advantage of Bekoev. but I failed to look into more of the athletic advantage of Bekoev and the power advantage of Bekoev. So after stuffing a few takedowns from Loader early on in that fight, Bekoev was able to get to his striking and overwhelm Loader and eventually get that TKO finish about halfway through the first round of their matchup. That now brings his UFC record to 2-0, with both of his wins coming in that first round by knockout. And he's a guy that primarily leans on his wrestling, but it seems like the time that he's putting in over there at American Top Team is really helping to round out his striking skills, especially with the confidence and power that we've been seeing him throw with as of late. That even goes back to his title defense against Chauncey Foxworth, who he knocked out and snapped that. He had a 3-fight winning streak in terms of decisions in the LFA after making his debut, but to have that emphatic victory over Foxworth was very helpful for him to get to the UFC and get that short notice opportunity against Zach Reese back in January. Bekoev, 29 years old. He's making a name for himself on social media with how much he trash talks a lot of people as well. And I think he's kind of underwhelmed by the fact that he has to fight a guy like Belgaroui, who's going to be making his UFC debut here. Now, if you guys remember, these guys were actually scheduled to fight back in August, as Belgaroui was going to be making a short notice UFC debut. Unfortunately, visa issues kept him out of the matchup, and now the UFC decided to give both these guys full training camps and square off in Vancouver. Now, Belgaroui has a 3-fight winning streak, coming off of that loss that he suffered on the Contender Series back in 2023 at the hands of Marco Tulio. That night, Tulio hurt Belgaroui numerous times and almost got him out of there, but the durability of Belgaroui really held up and allowed him to see the final bell. And it was not enough for the UFC to actually give Tulio a contract that night. Both Tulio and Belgaroui had to come back for the 2024 season of the Contender Series, and Tulio obviously made good on his shot and made it to the UFC, whereas Belgaroui picked up 2 wins on the regional scene, came back to the Contender Series, and put on a pretty pedestrian performance that the UFC did not enjoy, or at least Dana did not enjoy, and did not sign him the night of the fight. That fight, again, pedestrian pace. Belgaroui even had a point taken away from him in the second round after repeated eye pokes. Then he eventually got the finish in the third round, but Dana wanted no part of it. So that's where it comes into play, where the relationship and friendship that Belgaroui has now made with Alex Pereira after switching his focus to the MMA world, that's probably why he's made it to the UFC after Pereira was like, hey, get my training partner in here. He deserves it. He's on a 3-fight winning streak. He's a fun kickboxer. Even though he didn't impress you on the Contender Series, do me a favor. I might be one of your most popular fighters right now, so do me a favor and bring my friend into the fold. And that's what it seems like the UFC ended up doing. Again, Belgaroui was a former opponent of Alex Pereira back in their kickboxing days, and then when he turned his attention to mixed martial arts, he decided to move up to Connecticut and train alongside Glover Teixeira and Alex Pereira. He's a good kickboxer. His defensive grappling is slowly improving, but there's nothing special about the guy. He's very hittable. He's, his chin is obviously good enough to withstand some big shots, but I don't have many expectations for him in the UFC's middleweight division, considering the landscape of that weight class. And I think he's going to get that rude awakening here in his first fight against Bekoev, who, again, with the improvements in his striking game, should be able to set up his takedowns well enough and then really grind Belgaroui out from that top position. I think Belgaroui might be able to get back to his feet a few times, but it's just a matter of time before Bekoev eventually keeps him on his back and ends up grinding him out en route to a decision victory. Next up in the strawweight division, we got Stephanie Luciano coming in at minus 280, going up against Rovina Oliveira, who comes in at plus 240. Now, Luciano is looking to bounce back after a loss to Sam Hughes from earlier this year. And that night, she had a competitive first round, had a very good, really struggled in that second round where she nearly got finished and did manage to see a 10-8 in favor of Sam Hughes. But then Luciano did battle back in that third round after it was clear that Hughes had expended her gas tank trying to finish Luciano in that second round. But by then, it was too little too late for Luciano to get her hand raised, as Hughes ended up picking up a win on the scorecards. That was on the back end of Luciano getting that victory over Talita Alencar, where she stuffed pretty much all but one or two of her takedowns and then battered Alencar on the feet, showcasing that she is improving her grappling, but still a very dangerous striker where she often ends up doing her best work. She does a good job in terms of maintaining her range, landing good shots, kind of seeing takedown attempts coming her way, and then from there she's able to do a good job in terms of just picking her opponents apart from distance. Not crazy knockout power, but good stinging power, which often gives her opponents a lot of issues. And she's only 25 years old. Now she's going up against Ravina Oliveira, who's coming back from over 2 years away from action after she had suffered a bad knee injury after her UFC debut loss to Tainara Lisboa. That night, she got grinded out for the first 2 rounds of their matchup and had some success on the third, but couldn't muster up a finish and ultimately lost on the scorecards that night. And then she had knee surgery, rehab, all that stuff. And she was actually supposed to come back, I believe, in July, but was unable to make the date, as I think it was a little bit too quick for her to make that kind of turnaround. And now here she is returning after 2 years away from action, facing a fellow Brazilian fighter. I think at her best, Oliveira is a striking practitioner, but she doesn't provide too many issues there. Even though she's finished the majority of her wins on the regional scene, she fought some very low-level competition and had fought opponents with a combined record of 1-1 outside of her last regional fight. And even that opponent that she beat, that was 8-5, was 40 years old at the time. So she hadn't faced too much opposition coming up to the UFC. And then we saw when she went up against Lisboa, she got outgrinded by a striker, which was a big red flag. This matchup, I think Luciano can do whatever she wants to Oliveira. I think the ring rust is going to be too much for Oliveira. I think Luciano can take this into the grappling realm if she needs to and have success there. But even in the striking realm, I think Luciano is just slicker, faster, quicker with her punches. And I think we'll see her just put it together a lot better than Oliveira. And that should lead to Luciano winning this fight on the scorecards. Next up in this lightweight matchup, we got Kyle Prepolec coming in at plus 375, taking on veteran Drew Dober, who comes in at minus 500. Now, I'll give the UFC a little bit of flack in terms of signing Kyle Prepolec once again. That was obviously on short notice last time around when he took on Benoit Saint-Denis. We knew he'd get squashed in that fight, but he did manage to make it longer than I expected him to. You know, I said that it would be a shame if Benoit did not finish him in under 1.5 rounds, and Prepolec ended up lasting 1.5 rounds plus 5 seconds. It only took 5 more seconds for that over to cash there, but again, Prepolec was not ready for that type of fight, obviously stepping in on a very short notice. And again, a guy that I just don't think deserves to be at this level. You know, he's a good regional veteran up here in Canada, but when he faces these guys in the UFC, it's clear that he's just behind the ball a little bit too much and can't find any success. He went 0-2 back in 2019 during his first stint with the promotion. Then he went back to the regional scene, went 4-1, and then was scheduled to fight another opponent, or the guy that he first beat in that 4-1 run, Michael Dufour, and then got the opportunity to take on Benoit Saint-Denis instead after Joel Alvarez was forced out of that matchup. Prepolec trains out of Windsor, Ontario, pretty much trained there his entire career. Decent team down there, at least from Canadian MMA standards. But in terms of fighting at the UFC level, it's very hard for guys from that gym to have much success. And that's a gym that used to be home to guys like the Laramie brothers as well. And I believe those guys are actually training out of there full time still. But again, Prepolec, mainly a striker. Again, just tough to see why he's still in the UFC, other than the fact that we need some Canadian talent on these cards. Now, he's going up against Drew Dober, who's been in a very unfortunate slump as of late. He's 1-4 in his last 5 fights, riding a 3-fight losing streak at this time, and he's been finished in 3 of those last 4 losses. That first loss in this 3-fight losing streak came to Renato Moicano in a fight where it was on the table for Dober to win, but he made some bad fight IQ mistakes that allowed Moicano to snatch onto some positions and utilize his BJJ to grind Dober out. Then He went up against Gene Silva, who he had no answer for in terms of the explosivity and power that Silva was putting on him. And credit to Dober's chin in terms of holding up for eating as many shots as he did. And ultimately, he had to come up short due to a cut that night and end up losing that fight against Gene Silva, which, again, not a bad loss when you consider what Gene Silva has been doing as of late, outside of his loss to Diego Lopez. And then we saw him go up against Manuel Torres, where Torres' raw and just crazy knockout power was too much for Dober to overcome, and it only took about 2 minutes for Torres to find that big shot to put Dober away and end up getting the win there. Dober is a well-rounded fighter with over 10 years of experience on the UFC roster, but he just struggles against the top guys in the division who have enough knockout power to cause him trouble there, or just better overall fighters that can grind him out too, just like we saw with Renato Moicano. He still has some big power that you need to be wary of, but his durability is a big question mark at this stage of his career. Can Prepolec land that big shot and get him out of there that way? It's possible. That's why I would not be so keen on taking Dober at minus 500. It's possible that Dober could also find the finish here, but I think it's going to be Dober taking a little bit of a better approach in terms of landing takedowns, putting together a good body of work, and also mixing in the fact that Kyle Prepolec has never been knocked out in his career. I think it's going to be difficult for Dober to find that big shot to put him away. So I think Dober wins, but minus 500 is not a line I'd get attached to, especially for a guy that's 1-4 in his last 5 fights. I don't care what his strength of schedule looks like compared to what Prepolec brings to the table. We know one punch can change anything in the mixed martial arts game, and minus 500 is not something you want to get caught with if Prepolec ends up landing that big shot. But the prediction will be Dober, and Dober by decision. All right, next up, moving over to the middleweight division now. We got Danny Barlow coming in at minus 300, going up against Jourdain Santos, who comes in at plus 250. Now, Barlow is looking to bounce back after his first professional defeat, which was handed to him by Sam Patterson, who's absolutely been streaking as of late. And Barlow just, seemed to get a little bit overzealous that night. He was controlling the fight for, 2.5 minutes, walking Patterson down, landing his big power shots. But ultimately, it was Patterson who was able to counter him, land a big shot of his own, and eventually find that finish over Barlow in that first round. I think that was a wake-up call for the 30-year-old who, really felt indestructible going into that matchup, especially being as big of a favorite as he was. He did not give Patterson the respect that Patterson deserved, considering the striking chops that Patterson normally brings to the table. Barlow has wrestling in his back pocket, but he often uses it defensively so he can stick to his southpaw striking style where he snipes opponents from distance, especially with that left cross down the middle. There is a reason his nickname is Left Hand to God, is because he's often knocked his opponents out with that left right or left straight down the pipe. Sometimes he doesn't even set it up. Sometimes he just throws it just naked, and it often ends up landing because of the speed and power that he throws it with. But I think this loss to Sam Patterson will make him grow a little bit more and realize that he needs to throw some traffic in front of that cross if he hopes to be more successful with it as he continues to take steps up in the UFC. Now he's going up against Jourdain Santos, who's coming off of a loss against Ozzy Diaz in his UFC debut. And that was a night where we saw Santos throw a ridiculous amount of strikes. He threw 348 total strikes that night, but he wasn't the most accurate when he was actually landing them. Between him and Ozzy Diaz, they had combined for 266 significant strikes landed, but it was Diaz who was landing at a 51% clip, while Santos was only landing at 37%. He had a good first round, but he was unable to deal with the accurate volume of Diaz in the second and third rounds, and Diaz nearly finished him in that third round, showcasing how hittable and reckless Santos can be at times. This guy trains alongside the Bonfim brothers, who have surely helped out his striking game, and I think that's what helped him win that fight against Will Curry, pulling off the big upset and earning his contract to the UFC back in 2024. He's a decent fighter, 28 years old, but I think once he starts fighting guys of substance, just as we saw when he went up against Ozzy Diaz, he's going to end up coming up short. The loss against Will Curry. I think Will Curry has just been an overhyped prospect from Cage Warriors that continuously gets these opportunities to make it to the big show, but continues to fumble the bag whenever it matters most. And that Jourdain Santos fight was another example of it. Now, this matchup against Barlow, I think Barlow's improvements that he makes after that loss to Patterson will showcase here against Santos, and I think that speed and power is going to come into play. Even though Santos might throw a lot of volume, and he might even shoot a few takedowns here to try to stay away from the power of Barlow, I think it's just a matter of time before Barlow's power connects and puts Santos away. I think Santos is too hittable, a little bit too reckless, and he leaves too many openings in the striking realm, and for a guy like Barlow, I think it's going to be served on a silver platter as he lands that left cross down the pipe and puts Santos's lights clean out. So give me Barlow and Barlow by knockout. Next up in the flyweight division, we got Bruno Silva coming in at plus 180, going up against Hyun Sung Park, who comes in at minus 210. Starting off on the Silva side of things, he's riding a 2-fight losing streak with both of those losses coming by third-round knockout. Now, we can cut him some slack, considering that both those losses are coming against guys that are either going to be fighting for a title soon, in Joshua Van, who I believe has his scheduled date now against Alexandre Pantoja for the ending of the year, or Manel Kape, who is probably a win away from fighting for a title himself. So let's cut Silva a little bit of slack there. I did say that I was hampering on Silva back in the day in terms of not staying as active as he should be, but since July 2024, this will be his 4th fight. So in just under a year and a half's time, he's managed to stay very busy. Again, 1-2 in those first 3 fights. Let's see what kind of result he can pull out here against the upstart here in Hyun Sung Park. But in terms of a fighter, Silva's very gritty, very tough, has some slick boxing, a good pesky calf kick, has also a good grappling and jiu-jitsu game as well, but it seems like age and his durability is starting to catch up to him. He's trained at Fight Ready. He's trained down with Davison Figueiredo a few times as well, trained with the Pitbull brothers, but I really think that age and his lack of athleticism at times is going to get him in trouble against these better fighters who can keep him away from his game. If you guys remember, he was actually close to losing that fight against Cody Durden as well, where it seemed like the momentum was really shifting towards Durden, but then Silva landed a big shot to find that knockout to get himself another victory there. Now, he's going up against Hyun Sung Park, who was put in a very unfortunate position last time out. Now, Park had accepted a short notice matchup against Steve Erceg, I believe for August 9th. And, somewhat short notice, but I thought a very favorable matchup for him, especially when you consider what Ode Osborne was able to do for Steve Erceg that night. But then Park was kind of given a tough hand as the UFC was struggling to look for a replacement for Tatsuro Taira. I can't recall who Taira was supposed to face that night, but, they were struggling to fill that main event slot. And Park, from what I had heard, had gotten on a plane from Korea to make his way to Vegas, thinking that he was going to be fighting Steve Erceg the following week. But then as soon as he got off the plane, he was met with a call from Hunter Campbell. And Campbell kind of just, I don't want to say strong-armed him, but whenever you get a call from Hunter Campbell, he really wants you to do a favor for him. And that's where I think Park was forced to do that night. He had to expedite an expedited weight cut already and then take on a completely different matchup than what he was originally going up against. So very tough situation for Park there. He ends up getting finished by Taira in the second round of that matchup, but the UFC ended up rewarding Park by putting him right back into the game here and offering him a fight 2.5 months after that loss to Taira, and a fight that I believe is a lot more favorable for him. He's still 29 years old. He's very athletic, very strong, very fast, powerful as well, has a ton of knockout power in his shots, and he's usually very well versed in the ground game. We saw it in that first round against Taira with how well he defended, but I just don't think he was prepared enough should that fight have gone into the second round the way that it did. Here against Silva, I think he just has all the advantages. I am seeing a little bit of love coming in on Silva to bring that line down a little bit on Park, who was about minus 230 earlier today. But I think that this is still a very winnable fight for Park, a very favorable fight for him. I think he'll be able to beat Silva to the punch. I think he can nullify any of Silva's grappling if that's what Silva chooses to do here. And then I think it's just going to be the speed and power of Park that ends up being too much for Silva. So I like Park here at chalk. I think he does work. I think he does it pretty easily, and I think he comes through with a knockout victory. So give me Hyun Sung Park to win by knockout. All right, next up, we got a fun bantamweight scrap here between Charles Jourdain, who comes in at minus 160, going up against Davy Grant, who comes in at plus 140. Now, Jourdain pulled off a very solid submission victory over Victor Henry last time around, and that was the first ever submission loss in a very experienced fighter for Victor Henry, and I think even he was caught off guard with how nasty of a choke game Jourdain has developed. That snapped a 2-fight losing streak for Jourdain, who struggled with the distance striking of Sean Woodson, and then ended up getting finished by Gene Silva after that. Jourdain really looking to have some success down at bantamweight after fighting the majority of his UFC career up at featherweight. He made the weight pretty easily against Victor Henry, and I think that's going to be a constant reminder of the professional that he is, and I don't expect him to have any weight cutting issues moving forward. We know what he is. He's a flashy striker. He's developed such a nasty jiu-jitsu game. And I remember, when he got that first submission victory, I can't recall who it was over in the UFC, but he said, I know guys want to take me down. I know guys are scared of my flashy striking, so they're going to try to take me down and try to muzzle me there. So instead of just purely working on takedown defense, he was going to work to become a very dangerous BJJ specialist, specifically with guys shooting desperation takedowns or staying active off his back so he doesn't spend too much time there, or even just the ability to snatch up a submission from that position. And it's worked out very well for him when he finds himself getting attacked by other grapplers. Jourdain's fun. She's still young, 29 years old, facing some of the best that the featherweight division has already had to offer. And I think he can have an even more successful career at 135 pounds. But he has a very stiff test here against a guy that will be 40 years old in 2 months, in Davy Grant, who is now 4-1 over his last 5 fights, currently riding a 2-fight winning streak. And that one loss was a split decision loss in a very close fight against Daniel Marcos. I thought a lot of people scored that fight in Grant's favor, ends up getting a loss, but he goes back to the drawing board, gets back in the cage, and picks up 2, I believe, upset victories over Ramon Tavares and last time around against Damon Blackshear. Against Blackshear, he was dealing with a grapple-heavy approach early on in that matchup, showcased good enough defense, and really made Blackshear work a lot because it was clear that Grant was the fresher guy in the second and third rounds of that matchup, which allowed him to pick apart Blackshear and win that fight on the scorecards. Grant has some solid knockout power in his hands, and it seems like he thrives when fights take place in the pocket with the amount of power that he throws with. And considering how comfortable he is in the pocket, it's crazy that he has never been knocked out in the UFC. He's a guy that does a great job in terms of seeing his target and throwing with big wide hooks at times, or even straight shots down the pipe. He used to own an SBG gym out there in England, if I'm not mistaken, but I believe in recent years has permanently moved to Las Vegas, where he set up shop at Syndicate MMA and is a very close training partner of Vince Morales. I think that's great for him to stay close to the PI, stay close to a good training camp with good training partners, and I think that is probably what's to blame for why he's done so well, even as he closes in on 40 years old. Again, guys that are on that wrong side of 30 in these lower weight classes normally don't do that well. But Grant continues to go out there and pull off upset after upset and showcase that he's going to be a tough out for a lot of these young guys looking to crack into the rankings of the bantamweight division. But I think he's going to struggle here against Jourdain. I think Jourdain has that Marlon Vera type aggressiveness that Grant just can't get comfortable with. And I think if Grant looks to take this fight to the ground, I think he finds himself in trouble. 4 of his 7 losses have come by submission, and I think Jourdain's aggressiveness with that BJJ could really cause Grant some issues here. I know that we saw Jourdain to win by submission is sitting at plus 700. I think that's worth a little bit of a shot here, but I think it's going to be the striking that pulls that bad takedown attempt here from Grant, and that will allow Jourdain to snatch onto that submission and force the tap. Minus 160 is a little bit tough for me to fully get behind with Jourdain, given the veteran experience of Grant, the form that he's been looking as of late, and if he's able to really throw down with Jourdain whenever Jourdain throws those flashy strikes, maybe he catches Jourdain a few times and that slowly breaks Jourdain down. But I think Jourdain will be a little bit too fast. I think he'll be a little bit too unorthodox and aggressive enough that's going to really wear Grant down. And again, probably pull out a bad shot and allow Jourdain to snatch up his neck and force the tap. Our next up in the lightweight division, we got Canadian Kyle Nelson coming in at plus 100, going up against Matt Frevola, who comes in at minus 120. Now, starting off on the Nelson side of things, he's looking to bounce back after having his 3-fight winning streak snapped by Steve Garcia. I believe that fight was last year, where Nelson caught a kick from Garcia, ended up grabbing the back of Garcia, grinding that out for about 2 minutes, and then Garcia was able to reverse the position and start raining down big shots and earn another knockout victory. Nelson is normally a headhunter knockout specialist himself, but he saw that was really tough to get through at the UFC level. He tried transforming into a little bit more of a grappler. That didn't end up working. And then in that Blake Builder fight, we saw him really start to mix things up a little bit more, utilizing good power, managing the power well, landing some good calf kicks, and then even initiating the clinch and wearing opponents down there. And that's what led to him beating Blake Builder, Fernando Padilla, and then even catching Bill Algeo and being the first guy to beat him by knockout. It was very impressive what Nelson was able to do during that run, but I think that Steve Garcia fight was a bit of a wake-up call in terms of what his ceiling could be. Now, he's going up against Matt Frevola, who I maybe overhyped in his last fight against Vera back in September of 2024. I really thought Frevola's wrestling would be the difference maker there, and even though he landed a few of them, he couldn't muster up enough control or damage from that top position for it to have much of an impact on that fight. He ended up getting picked apart and dropped numerous times by Fiorot before finally being finished in the third round of that matchup, showcasing that the durability of Frevola will continue to be an issue at this stage of his career. At his best, he has big knockout power, just as when he went on those 3 wins in this 5-fight run that he's on right now over Guillermo Valdez, Atman Azaitar, and even Drew Dober, but his chin in return has just not looked that great. I think at this stage of his career, it would be best suited for him to chase after takedown attempts, wrestling, especially when he has a good enough advantage in any specific matchup. And I expect that to be the case here when he goes up against Kyle Nelson. There is obviously that early danger for that Nelson knockout power, but I think Frevola can avoid it, eventually get to his grappling, his takedowns, and top pressure, and I think that will lead to him grinding this fight out. I know a lot of people are expecting a knockout in this matchup, but if Frevola does what's best for him, I think it's going to come through a grinding and grueling approach that Nelson won't be able to keep up with. Even with that said, I can't trust Frevola, even at minus 120, in a fight where one shot could really change the trajectory of this fight. You know, if there is some Nelson love that starts to come in and we see Frevola start trickling further into that underdog territory, maybe that's where I get the confidence and the intent to actually bet that spot. But other than that, I'd rather pass on this fight. Could be chaotic, could be boring, who knows. I expect Frevola to choose a ladder if he wants to put on a safe performance to try to snap this 2-fight winning streak. So I'm going to go Frevola and Frevola by decision. Next up, we have a bantamweight matchup between Cody Gibson, who comes in at minus 185, going up against Aoriqileng, who comes in at plus 160. Now, neither of these guys are Canadian, but they find themselves on the main card, and I believe a lot of that has to do with the potential of the fight of the night that they could put on should this fight go a certain way. Let's start off on the Cody Gibson side of things now, who's 2-3 in his last 5 fights, most recently coming up short against Damon Blackshear by submission. Now, that was a fight where we saw Gibson have some very good early success, swarming Blackshear, landing a boatload of shots, but then it seemed like he had emptied his gas tank a little bit too early, which led to Blackshear taking over over near the ending of that first round and then eventually finding that submission in the second round. Gibson is a solid wrestler. I believe he's a high school wrestling coach, if I'm not mistaken, but also a very well-rounded striker, where when he does manage his gas tank well, we get wars like he had against Brad Katona in the tough finale, which earned his way back into the UFC, even though he came up short against Katona that night. I think they combined for like 300 plus significant strikes landed on each other. It was absolutely crazy the type of war these guys went to, and I think the UFC really applauded that, hence why they continue to give him another shot. He did lose to Miles Johns even after that loss against Brad Katona, but he did manage to bounce back with a submission win over Brian Kelleher, and then a good dominant victory over Chad and Helliger. Again, Gibson is very solid. He's 38 years old. He's getting up there in age, obviously, so that's something obviously to keep an eye on as well. But when he's on, he's very difficult to deal with, especially with how well he mixes the martial arts together. Now he's going up against a very violent Aoriqileng, aka the Mongolian murderer, who's coming off of a decision loss against Raul Rosas Jr. from the Sphere card last year. Now, that was a fight where he had to deal with the grappling of Rosas Jr. in the first round, but did a good job with his submission defense to avoid being finished. And then he had some solid success in the second round as Rosas Jr. was struggling to get that fight into the grappling realm until the third round, where Rosas was able to get that dominant position again and grind the rest of the fight out and give Aoriqileng a decision loss. At his best, Aoriqileng is a guy that likes to dictate the pace, move forward, throw big combinations, land some solid calf kicks as well. Doesn't often go into the grappling realm unless it's initiated by his opponent, but he's a guy that likes to keep a high pace and wear opponents down and then really butcher them on the feet with combinations, his Muay Thai, and just striking overall. I love that he joined the Fight Ready crew a couple fights ago now, but I just really believe he was already a finished product before coming to that gym. He's aggressive, so he's learned to kind of taper that down a little bit to help his gas tank, especially with the level of competition he's fighting in the UFC. But as we've been seeing over his last little run, it's tough to really implement it against guys that can hang with the striking or put him in bad positions in the striking or in the grappling realm, and often just muzzling that aggressive striking approach that we see from him. Now, on paper, I feel like this is a bad stylistic matchup for Aoriqileng. I think that Gibson can compete with Aoriqileng in the striking realm, and then I think he can time some takedowns well here, and that should help him really just slow Aoriqileng down, slow that aggression down, so that Gibson doesn't gas himself out, dealing with the madman who's just going to be moving forward the entire way. I think, even at 38 years old, there are lessons to be learned, and I think Gibson learned his lesson last time around in that Blackshear fight from emptying his gas tank a little bit too early. I think we'll see him do a good job in terms of just picking Aoriqileng apart, landing some good combinations, mixing in takedowns, and grinding this fight out. But at minus 185, just a little bit too wide for me to be comfortable in terms of shooting on this spot, especially if Aoriqileng can shut down the grappling and take control of this fight in the striking realm. It's a very winnable fight for the Mongolian fighter as well. So, maybe I'll sit back, see where this line goes. If Aoriqileng starts to get a little bit wider, maybe I'll consider a small shot on him as a dog. Or if Gibson gets down to, minus 125, minus 130, maybe I would consider him there. But as of right now, I'd pass at the current lines that are available. Our next up in the women's flyweight division, we have recent title challenger Manon Fiorot coming in at minus 225, going up against Jasudavicius, coming in at plus 190, looking to defend home soil once again. Now, Fiorot is coming off of a title fight loss at the hands of Valentina Shevchenko back in Canada as well. Actually, that was back in May in Montreal, where she just really couldn't get to her game. Now, her game normally showcases when she's able to tread at distance, move well laterally, crash the pocket with good combinations and her kickboxing, and then get back out into range before opponents can have any success. We saw her do it very well against Rose Namajunas. We saw her do it even better in a main event slot against Erin Blanchfield, shutting down all the takedown attempts coming from Blanchfield that night, although there weren't many because of the perpetual motion that Fiorot stayed in. And then Fiorot even found herself as the favorite against Shevchenko, but I think a lot of people were letting the Alexa Grasso trilogy cloud their judgment in terms of how good Shevchenko can actually be. A lot of people thought Fiorot would be the better striker that night, but it was Shevchenko's striking that caused Fiorot a lot of problems, that seemed to force Fiorot to change up her game plan and try to utilize her physicality in the clinch, but she was unable to get off on enough effective damage for her to win at least 3 rounds of that 5-round fight. It ended up being, I believe, 48-47 all around, as Shevchenko clearly won 3, maybe 4 of the 5 rounds, out damaging, dropping Fiorot a few times as well, and showcasing why she was the best flyweight on the planet. But I think that's a fight that Fiorot can learn from and come back stronger from. It depends on the stylistic matchup she has ahead of her, but she is still a very dangerous striker who may not throw with a lot of power, but clearly with enough sting that it causes opponents trouble in terms of getting to their game plan and trying to execute it. I get it. She's 35 years old, but she can still compete at a high enough level to keep herself in the top 5 of the flyweight rankings. Now she's going up against Jasudavicius now, who's running a 5-fight winning streak, the longest of her 17-fight career, and the biggest win that she picked up was last time around, as she easily ran through Jessica Andrade and found that submission early in that first round. That's Jasudavicius at her best. She's strong, she's physical, she does a great job with the wrestling and chaining attempts together, and then once she gets fights to the ground, she does a great job in terms of establishing dominant position and either threatening with submissions, nasty ground and pound, throwing big elbows as well. She's just so good utilizing her just weird lanky frame on the mat and trying to generate enough power to really break opponents down. It's in the striking game where we often see her have issues. We did see her go to Thailand in one of her recent training camps to try to round out her game and be a little bit more comfortable in the striking realm, but you see in fights where she tries to implement it, it's not soon after that she ends up getting fights to the ground and just going back to her basics and just being where she's comfortable most, and that's often establishing that top position. The 2 losses that she has in the UFC have come to 2 completely different fighters. The first came to Natalia Silva, who utilized a perpetual motion of striking and movement that really caused Jasudavicius issues, and then against Tracy Cortez, who was just a better wrestler and kept Jasudavicius from having prolonged success. Fiorot is more of a Natalia Silva than a Tracy Cortez, and may even be able to do what Natalia Silva did, but maybe even better. I think Fiorot's lateral movement, seeing Jasudavicius shoot these takedowns, I think we'll see Fiorot stuff most of them, or at least stay in a cutting angles, or staying in a movement style that's going to cause Jasudavicius issues in terms of setting up a proper takedown attempt. Jasudavicius is going to have to crash the pocket recklessly and try to force Fiorot up against the cage if she hopes to get in on a clean enough takedown attempt. And even from there, Fiorot's quite strong as well, and it's worked out pretty well for her in her UFC career in terms of stopping takedowns and then just sticking with her striking game. So I completely understand why Fiorot is a big favorite in this spot. I think deservedly so. Jasudavicius is just not comfortable enough in the striking realm, and I don't think she can really make it up here against Fiorot. Maybe Jasudavicius lands one good takedown, but I think that we'll see Fiorot quickly work back to her feet and then get back to her rinse-repeat style of striking, in and out, stay moving, stop the takedowns, and just give us a classic Fiorot performance. I'm hoping I'm wrong here. I'm a big Jasudavicius fan. I'm a big Niagara top team fan, and I would love nothing more than for these Canadians to be successful at this level in the mixed martial arts game. But stylistically speaking, I just do not think this is a good matchup for Jasudavicius, and I think we see Fiorot win this fight on the scorecards. All right, next up, in the bantamweight division, we got Marlon Vera coming in at plus 110, going up against Ayman Zahabi, who comes in at minus 130. Now, Vera is looking to shuck off this 2-fight losing streak that he currently finds himself on. The first of which was that title shot that he had against Sugar Sean O'Malley back in early of 2024, and he got absolutely battered that night. Credit to his durability, he managed to see the final bell, but it did not look good for him for the majority of that fight. Then, not even just the majority, all of that fight. I think he had a little bit of success in that 5th round, but it was still just too much for him to overcome. Then he went up against Davison Figueiredo, where he really struggled to get off on his own style there. He could not do enough damage against Figueiredo. I think Figueiredo grinded out that first round. Vera won that second round. And then Davidson just slowly picked Vera apart in that third round and ended up winning that fight on the scorecards. And then Vera was actually supposed to fight Mario Bautista back in June, but was forced out of that fight. And that was the first time he had ever pulled out of a fight in his UFC career. But a nagging rib injury forced him out of that matchup because he felt it just kept him from being able to perform at his best. He has a lot of miles on his body with 34 professional fights to his name, but he's still only 32 years old. So I think this time away from action probably will help him out and maybe help him find that fire once again to try to be one of the more violent bantamweights on the UFC roster. At his best, he's a bit of a slow starter, but once he finds his timing and his pace, he really starts to pick it up and wear his opponents down and either finish them late or do enough to win the latter rounds to get the fight on the scorecards. Now he's going up against Ayman Zahabi, who's had a crazy career resurgence as of late. He was not doing too well to start off his UFC career, took off a year and a half away from action, and then since returning, he's on a 6-fight winning streak, and he's gradually worked his way up the bantamweight rankings, taking on tougher competition the entire way, and he's found himself as the underdog in 5 of those 6 fights, and he's won every single one of them. Most recently was the Jose Aldo fight back in May. That one, I'm still surprised about that Jose let that one slip through his fingers. He did a great job in terms of battering Zahabi in that first round, and I thought there was a good enough argument that Aldo deserved to win that second round, but not one judge gave that round to Aldo. And then in the third round, Zahabi got hurt very badly, but managed to stay within himself and then land a takedown on an exhausted Aldo and just continuously rain down elbows to end off that fight and then end up winning that fight on the scorecards. Normally, Zahabi is a guy that likes to utilize a disciplined striking approach with good range management, good footwork, good countering, and good game planning as well, which is surprising even at 37 years old that he can be this effective. But, I don't want to say any of these wins have been flukes. He's done a great job in terms of shutting down the previously undefeated Javid Basharat, outworking Pedro Munoz, and then really turning it on late against a gassing Jose Aldo. But this fight against Marlon Vera will be a solid test for him to see whether he can deal with somebody that's not going to gas out, a guy that has a violent arsenal of skills himself, and won't really allow Zahabi to get comfortable with fighting the style that Zahabi has been fighting. That's why I kind of like Vera here. And historically speaking, I'm not a big Vera guy. I don't like the fact that he starts off his fight slow, but once he does start to pick up steam, he starts to get violent. He gets quite aggressive, and that's where opponents really start to struggle in terms of having much success of their own. So Zahabi could have good success in that first round, but after that, I start to expect this to start swinging in Vera's favor as he really starts to put it on Zahabi, maybe works to a late finish, but I'm going to go with Vera, and I think he ends up winning this fight on the scorecards after dominantly winning the second and third rounds of this matchup. All right. That brings us to our welterweight co-main event now, where we have Kevin Holland coming in at plus 100, going up against Mike Malott, who comes in at minus 120. Kevin Holland came in as a pretty big favorite against Daniel Rodriguez last time around, and he couldn't have much success of his own. It seemed that there was something that D-Rod was doing that was disrupting Holland, and it led to Holland actually landing 2 knockdowns, I believe, in the second round, and then Holland eventually, Rodriguez landed 2 knockdowns in the second round, and then Holland came back in the third and had a strong third round, even in landing a knockdown of his own, but he was unable to undo the work that Rodriguez did in the first 2 rounds, ultimately leading to Holland losing that fight on the scorecards. That was a very surprising spot. Holland is not a guy that I would trust at chalk, historically speaking, but that was a fight that I felt he could win pretty easily, but something was off. He just couldn't get to his game. He couldn't get into his groove, and he ended up paying for it through those first 2 rounds. Now here he is with his 5th fight in 2025 for the second time in his UFC career. Maybe not as quickly as when he did it for the first time from May 2020 to December 2020, but still very impressive to get into the cage 5 times in 12 months. And here he's doing it in enemy territory, looking to wipe that taste of the Daniel Rodriguez loss out of his mouth sooner than later. That loss came on the back end of 2 straight victories over Gunnar Nelson and a dominant one over Vicente Luque, who he submitted in the second round of that matchup. And I'm expecting to see a little bit more of a fire under Holland's ass coming into this fight against Mike Malott. At his best, he exaggerates his 81-inch reach by picking opponents apart with the sniper-like shots from distance, or he loves to attack that front choke series where he's caught numerous opponents with that front choke series, that Darce choke, that anaconda, that guillotine even. He's done such a good job in terms of implementing that and putting opponents to sleep. At 32 years old, he's still firmly in his prime, and I'm glad that he's realized that the most success he's going to have, or even the best chance of getting into the top 5 of a division is by sticking at welterweight rather than jumping between middleweight and 170 pounds. Now he's going up against Mike Malott, who's slowly building up momentum once again after suffering that loss against Neil Magny back in January of 2024, which he was 15 seconds away from maybe winning by decision. I believe he was up on all scorecards going into that final round, but it was clear Magny's pace and resilience was causing Malott a lot of troubles, which forced him to slow down, exhaust his gas tank, and end up getting finished with a barrage of shots with about 15 seconds left on the clock there by the Gazelle, Neil Magny. But Malott did manage to bounce back with the win over Trevin Giles, where we saw a bit of an unorthodox approach from Malott. Going into that fight, he had finished every single one of his opponents. I believe all but one of them in the first round, and the other one came in the second round. But in the Jaws fight, stayed a little bit more calm, a little bit more composed, let his striking do the talking, and that was enough for him to win that fight on the scorecards. Then he followed that up with another performance against Charles Radke, where he utilized another similar technical striking approach, and then he just let the knockout come. And that came in the second round. After a solid start in the first round, the second round, Radke was caught with the left hook that floored him, and Malott followed up with a couple big shots to put him away there. So the finishes can still come from Malott. He doesn't need to be as aggressive as he has been in previous fights in his career. And I think that maturity at 33 years old is going to continue to show here, and he could pick up his biggest victory to date if he's able to go out there and get this victory over Kevin Holland. The issue I have is Holland is going to force Malott to fight, and Holland is going to force Malott to throw at air a lot, considering the 8-inch reach advantage he has in this matchup. I also wouldn't be surprised to see Holland try to get this fight into the grappling realm, and that's where I think Malott might have some success. He's a very dangerous BJJ specialist himself, and I'll even say, on paper, if you just talk about skills, I think Malott is the better fighter. I think he's more skilled. I think he's more talented. But when you bring the physical aspects into the fight and into the equation, I think Holland has better durability. I think he's faster. I think he has better cardio. And I think those 3 things could come into play here, which could cause Mike Malott some issues. The under 2.5 at -160, I think, is a great spot. I think the way Holland fights, it's going to bring that aggressiveness out of Malott, and that could either come through with a Malott victory of his own, or Malott leaving himself to get caught and getting finished himself. It pains me to say this. I want to take Mike Malott, Maple Militia all the way, but I feel like this is a bad matchup for him. I think Holland, his speed, his stinging power, that aggressive BJJ, if this fight does end up hitting the mat, I think that's going to cause him a lot of issues. Malott could take the grapple heavy approach, and he could have some success for a little bit. We know that takes a lot of energy out of him, and I think Holland, with his improved BJJ and defensive grappling, will eventually be able to catch Malott in something if that's the approach that Malott ends up taking. But I think Holland makes this uncomfortable for Malott, and I think that leads to him getting a finish, whether it's a straight-up knockout or a club and sub. I hate to do it, but I have to go Kevin Holland here. And at plus money, a guy that was -300 in his last fight, I get it. This is a completely different stylistic matchup, but to get him at plus 100, I think is a spot that you need to take advantage of here. I'm hoping I'm wrong. I'm hoping Malott gets the finish and he gets the win. But I think it's going to be Holland here who ends up getting his hand raised inside the distance. All right. That brings us to the middleweight main event for UFC Vancouver, where we got Renier de Ridder coming in at -205, going up against short notice replacement Brendan Allen, who comes in at plus 175. Now, the backstory not even backstory, or at least the narrative going into this matchup, are both these guys usually represent Killcliff FC. So it's kind of weird that Brendan Allen accepted this fight. Maybe weren't really good friends anyway to begin with, or this was just too big of an opportunity for Allen to pass up on. But I know Allen did go up to Chicago for the majority of this training camp, although abbreviated as it was, to avoid any type of conflict of interest in terms of training alongside De Ridder or, sharing training partners, all that stuff. You got to split it up for sure. Now, De Ridder has been doing great things since joining the UFC in late 2024. This will be his 5th fight since November of 2024, I believe it is. He's 4-0 in just 8 months, finishing all but one of his opponents. The last one, obviously, against Robert Whittaker. Very close fight, but showcased that he deserves to be amongst the best in the middleweight division, and he was able to eke out a split decision victory that night. But he showed, even in the Bo Nickal fight, he doesn't need to get the fight to the grappling realm for him to have success. He's reckless. He's aggressive. He loves to chase his opponents down. He loves to utilize nasty elbows. He's tall, lanky, and gangly for this division at 6'4" and a 78-inch reach. But there's no beating around the bush. He is best when he can get opponents to the ground and utilize his nasty submission game, which is, the large reason why he has such a good record at 21-2. And again, he showed in the Whittaker fight. In the striking realm, you would expect Whittaker to be the more dangerous fighter, but De Ridder just put it on him, and it just seemed Whittaker was completely engulfed and struggling with the aggression of De Ridder that night, which is why he seemed to slow down quicker than a lot of people expected him to. But a lot of that needs to be credited to De Ridder for putting him in those uncomfortable and stressful situations, which would lead to De Ridder, dictating the pace for most of that fight. Now here, against Brendan Allen, before researching this fight, I thought it was a great stylistic matchup. A guy that has a good enough jiu-jitsu game to try to stay away from the majority of danger that De Ridder usually puts his opponents in, when fights hit the mat. Technically speaking, maybe a superior striker than De Ridder as well. But it's tough to build that confidence from a guy that's 1-2 in his last 3 fights. Now, let's lay it out how it is. The 2 guys he lost to, Nasruddin Imavov and Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, could easily be fighting for a title as well. But Allen had no answers for their styles, whether it was the striking advantage of Imavov or the smothering grappling of Hernandez. But he did manage to get back on the winning track last time around as he picked apart Marvin Vettori, largely showcasing his striking improvements against a guy in Vettori who's a little bit stiff, a little bit robotic with the striking. And I think Allen was kind of having a field day in the striking realm, winning that fight, which ended up winning Fight of the Night honors as well. Again, he has a good kicking game, likes to throw from either stance. I like that he's kind of mixing up his training. Even before this matchup, he did mix it up with Bilal Muhammad and the guys up there in Chicago, alongside what he normally does at Killcliff FC. But I think we've seen his ceiling, and I think De Ridder is at a stage in his career where he just might be a little bit too aggressive and a little bit too good of a BJJ specialist for Allen to have much success here. So I think we're going to see De Ridder on the front foot for most of this fight. I think he's going to keep Allen backing up. I think he's going to land a few takedowns. We've seen Allen be a little bit too comfortable off his back, trusting his BJJ too much, and I think that's a no-no against a guy like De Ridder, who I just don't think he's going to be able to catch in anything. Last thing I'll say about De Ridder, a lot of people continue to give him flack about the Gerald Mearshart fight, but I think he showcased and has been showcasing over his last couple wins that was an anomaly of a fight. It was close. Mearshart had his success too, but I think that De Ridder is just slowly becoming more comfortable in the cage, and that's been showing obviously in those 2 big wins that he had recently over Bo Nickal and Robert Whittaker. I expect De Ridder to just control this fight, to keep Allen in uncomfortable positions. He may be able to finish Allen. I'm not going to bet on that. At the current line, I'd probably pass as well. But I do think De Ridder controls this fight. I think he keeps Allen on his back for most of this matchup. Maybe even on his back foot with his aggressive striking approach. And as long as his durability and cardio continues to hold up, I think he can just stay in the driver's seat and cause Allen a ton of issues and win this fight on the scorecards, which I hope leads to a rebooking of De Ridder and Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, who I believe is more than deserving of that title shot. I know it's De Ridder. again, if he wins this weekend, Imavov and Hernandez, who are all in running for a potential title shot. And it comes down to who has the most impressive performance. I don't think Imavov or Hernandez are scheduled as of yet. That would be a great matchup whenever Hernandez heals up. But again, in this matchup, I'm going to Ritter. The Ritter by decision. Yeah, there you guys go. All right. Full card breakdown for UFC Vancouver finally done for you guys here. I'm still going to be doing all my segments for the UFC card as I usually do. Those will come out obviously Thursday and Friday, so stay tuned for that. And again, reminder, the 3 regional events I'll be covering will strictly be on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. Check the link for that in the description below. I'll have track plays for all those cards. And yeah, looking forward to breaking down all these fights for you guys. All right. I'll see you guys again tomorrow for a plethora of content I'm going to be dropping for you guys. I'll see you then. Peace.